Well, good evening to everyone in Ukraine, and good, I guess, still morning for those of us who are in the Americas. Um, we're grateful that you're here with us today. We're going to talk about the topic moral injury among Ukrainian soldiers. And this presentation really comes from a paper that was recently published in the American Military Psychology Journal. There's a reference to it at the bottom of this slide. Anyone who would like to get a copy can't access it. At least the English version I have, and I would be glad to send it to anyone who wants to email me. And I know Oksana Bayer has a copy, and you can contact her as well, and she can forward it to you. So let's go to the next slide. I'm going to take really about maybe 5 or 6 minutes to go through a few slides before I turn it over to our primary presenter today to talk about some case studies associated with the topic of moral problems. But as background, you can see that all of this evolved from some discussion of recent changes in 2025 in the U.S. Diagnostic Manual. And at that point, the notion of moral problem was entered as a Z code in this diagnostic manual. And the most important aspect of that is it provides an opportunity for clinicians to work and treat this in terms of their clinical attention that they're giving to clients. And so we've highlighted in red here the concept that a moral problem includes experiences that disrupts one's understanding of right and wrong, disrupts our sense of goodness of self and others and of institutions. So it's not a psychiatric diagnosis, but rather it's considered an issue that is legitimate for clinical attention. I think most of us hope that in the future this will continue to evolve and there will be more opportunities to think about what moral problems and moral injuries represent. Next slide. My colleague Carl Castro, who can't be with us today, put together this slide as a way of thinking about moral problems on a continuum. And you can see from the types of issues that are highlighted and their effect on one's character and one's identity. And we tried to provide some examples that might be relevant in Ukraine. Focusing here for a moment on this notion of moral injury, seeing that as really a breakdown in character, a place where one might experience disgrace or broken identity. And we gave an example here of individuals, for example, who might avoid military service and feel guilt or shame associated with that. But this is one way of approaching this topic. Go to the next slide. For me, when I think about moral injury, I think about it in the context of how a moral problem can evolve into moral injury, and then how moral injury may itself become a disorder in terms of our functioning. So understanding this continuum, it's important to understand that we're thinking about the person in the environment. Both of these concepts are fundamental to our clinical practice. And we need to understand the nature of the harmful experience. We need to understand the context in which it exists. And we need to think about the intensity and the duration of the experience. So in a sense, if you're not aware and you don't understand the signs and symptoms of moral problems and moral injury, then it's really difficult to think about how one would approach treatment. So, in this sense, we know that stress is cumulative, that it occurs in ways that affect what we call our human matrix of our biological, psychological, social, and spiritual and moral ethical beliefs, and that with constant interaction here across these four wings of this matrix, that anything that affects any one of the wings affects the others. They all interact. So I give as a very simple example to understand this notion of matrix, the idea that when we lack restorative sleep as a biological function, it's going to affect our psychological functioning. It's going to disrupt our social relationships, and we may experience actions, things that we do or fail to do that cause harm. Next slide. So when we think about this in the context of Russia's war in Ukraine, all of you understand more profoundly than even I how horrific this war has been. And so when we focus, and the data here comes from British and American intelligence sources, recognizing that the actual casualties are not made public. But we estimate that there are as many as 600,000 Ukrainian soldiers that have been impacted, with maybe 100,000 to 140,000 who have died in this war already. While Russian casualties actually may be higher, they're not higher as a percentage of population. So there are some estimates now that Ukraine casualties are equivalent to one of every 16 Ukrainian men in the age group of 18 to 49 who have become a casualty of this war. And we know when I use the word casualty, we're not including all of the disruptive experiences that Ukrainian soldiers are bringing home with them from combat. Combat always has the residue of the experiences that one undergoes. Next slide. We know that this war is horrific. I mean, the descriptions of the fighting are similar to descriptions of fighting in World War I, where Ukrainian soldiers are experiencing intense, high-tech grinding combat. Often it's brutal trench-style warfare, heavy artillery, dense minefields, relentless drone surveillance, where we say to be seen is to die. And this is a war of attrition. So Ukrainian soldiers who survive for months without significant breaks, leading to what we know is extreme fatigue, psychological strain, and in some cases, really an emotional and psychological demoralization. So all these complex factors taken together help us understand what we're going to be talking about in the context of the moral problems that may confront Ukrainian soldiers. Next slide. So it's necessary to know that as we go forward, there is uncertainty in the face of what soldiers expect. No one knows for how long they're going to have to serve. They don't know how long this war is going to continue, what the outcome might be, and it creates moral challenges for many soldiers. In some cases, raises questions about the actions of leaders. It may provide a sense of betrayal of institutions, and many feel that their sacrifices and suffering may be unfair. So, this is all a context that's present as we think about the kinds of moral problems that soldiers face. Next slide. So again, as I said, our presentation today is based on our article in military psychology, which really is an effort to expand understanding of what moral problems are in the context of the experience of war. So I'm turning now to my two Ukrainian colleagues who are the primary authors of this paper. I'm not sure who would like to begin with comments. And then we have three cases that we'll try to look at briefly and then open up for a discussion of these issues as all of you are experiencing in your everyday lives and in your practice. So let me turn it over to Vladislav or to Ole to pick up from here. Thank you.
Okay, Oleg, would you allow me to go first? Thank you. So, dear colleagues, I'm glad to be here today. I'm glad for the opportunity to speak to you and to present the article which has been published. Of course, I'll introduce myself. I am a psychologist and a military psychologist, and up until recently, I was in the military. I was the head of the psychology department in the operational command, and I had the opportunity to meet with a lot of people, and approximately it was 8,000 military servicemen. And it gives me the possibility to say that I saw different peculiarities of behavior which do not fit into the stress reactions or the reactions of the body to the trauma. They mostly relate to the moral problems, worries, and to moral injuries. So these cases that we have prepared and the cases as we want to introduce them. And before I want to introduce them, I would like to tell you why we want to say this. And since I've been working as a psychotherapist, I can see that the state of our veterans do not relate to different diagnostical criteria, and they more relate to the deep moral aspects. And you cannot always interpret everything from the context of PTSD or depression or other clinical form. And it's true. When I was going through my service, I saw states that could probably not be classified as psychological disorders. And this aspect of moral issues and moral traumas is very relevant. I think everybody understands this because the war is still going on, and civilians end up in the war. And our first case is about that. So first, I would like to introduce this case. So the slide, the erosion of autonomy. So that's the psychological term, but it is connected with the thing that a person loses the feel of self in a completely different environment, in the environment of perhaps some cruelty. Of course, the hierarchical structure of the military changes the person in terms of having to work in a team, and a person loses this autonomy. Over time, it becomes extremely complicated, and it brings a lot of moral issues. And we can see this a lot in the military. And on this case, we have description of a specific state. You might probably see this. We have described a person who was conducting a lot of psychological support in the time. And military psychologists, they face an issue of the second degree trauma. So those who are psychologists, they understand what we're talking about here. So we live through the lives of others, and we cannot set up blocks occasionally. And of course, we have traumatization, which causes some moral issues, especially if we're talking about people who have been released from enemy captivity. So those tortures, this humiliation that are being conducted in the Russian captivity, these are inhuman conditions, and nothing similar has been faced like this in the civilian life if we're talking about an average person. Can you call this a traumatizing experience? Not likely. Can you call this a stress? The same. Unlikely. But if we're talking about the discrepancy between moral characteristics and the expectations of what is normal behavior and the behavior that is faced there by the psychologist, and I'm not talking about the uh, prisoners of war, and this is the best definition of a moral injury. So I brought this injury here as well. And in our case, we have a description of the episode where this endless traumatization causes the loss of identity, the so called erosion of autonomy, when a person forgets and is forced to adapt to new reality and forgets everything that they were before. And this is one of the cases that we have described in the article. We have many, and they just highlight, emphasize that moral injury and moral uh, issues are a separate thing from psychological disorders than, say, everything that we know. Well, I would like to talk about all those three cases, or perhaps I can give the word to Oleg, and then we would like to come back to the cases because I would like to talk to the audience and share my experience of working with military servicemen. Of course, you need to understand which room we have here. So it would be a lot easier for me to cooperate here and to focus my attention.
Maybe, well, you already told us some things about the moral trauma. And I know that we have some colleagues or experts who believe that these things should not be singled out. So we have some conceptual things. Maybe we already have some feedback to discuss right now. Yes, I agree. Well, of course, I will be happy to respond if you have any comments. So, should a moral injury be singled out as a separate phenomenon, mental health phenomenon, which has some specific approaches? It is unlikely that a moral injury can be treated with antidepressants or psychotropic substances because it doesn't give you, though it is included in the classification of DSM-3 as a moral problem. However, it is unlikely that this is a clearly defined condition accepted by everybody, like depression or anxiety disorder. I'm in favor. So one of the comments is I'm in favor to single it out as a separate thing. Military psychologist, deputy commander for psychological support. Yes, you are coming from our environment of our colleagues. Dear listeners, if you have questions about this one, about this case, I can comment on that, or we can proceed with other cases. Because this one is a bit abstract and the others are more specific and factual. Do you have a link to the article? I think the organizers have already sent the link. Chief of the group of psychological support and recovery. So now I know the audience members. All right. Then allow me please to briefly present the cases. If you don't mind, Oleg. I will try to be brief, and then I will provide comments and answers to the question. Yes, this slide is about the weight of survival. All right, we have a chief of psychological support service. Great. If possible, move to the next slide. All right. Great. The way of survival. This case appeared after one of the missions when I had to work with a unit that completed its tasks. This was in 2023. There were very complicated combat situations in the town of Bakhmut. There were a lot of casualties in the unit. So we were sent into this unit to do the decompression. Probably you understand what this means. If you don't know what decompression is, so everything that causes traumatic experience is called compression, like in diving, and everything that leads to easing the situation, to unloading, this means decompression. So according to Order 460, we were doing our work to decompress the stuff. We were doing group work, debriefings. We had discussions in small groups of 13 to 15 people. So this discussion lasts for about 1 hour and a half or 2 hours. They are very emotional. People just vent everything that they have gathered, that they have accumulated when they were serving in the front line. Somebody talked more or less, and one boy was sitting there and looking at me, but he was silent. He was just looking at me. And after the debriefing was over, I saw that he wanted to say something, and I came up to him. I established the contact, and I told him, I said, "My friend, can I help you?" So he felt that he wanted to talk, and he said that he lost almost all of his comrades. I lost everything, all my friends, childhood friends, all the classmates. At first I doubted this, and I told him, "Really, is that so?" And he says that he lost 13 comrades. It was very difficult to believe. He was very suppressed, and he didn't want to speak a lot. At this point, I understood that it was remembering all those 13 people, all his comrades and childhood friends. So we stepped aside, and I was trying to support him, and he remembered every one of them and every episode when every one of those people died. He kept all those episodes in his memory, every terrible loss. And he was saying all the time that his life was not worth living. And he was very oppressed by the fact that he survived 1 out of 13. And all of his friends died. This episode is very symbolic and typical for our war, and I saw many cases of the way of survival among many soldiers. So we singled this out as a separate type of a moral injury, the way of survival. Maybe this it corresponds to the international classification if our American colleagues agree with me. So everything we could do with this soldier, let's say his name was Dmitro, everything we could do after he told all the 13 stories, we could make a prayer and remember those people in our hearts. And in this way, we were trying to stabilize his condition. And it seemed to me that this really happened. He felt more at ease. So he didn't speak during the debriefing conversation, but when he expressed everything he experienced, it made him feel easier. Well, when I'm telling you about this, this is not so much an intervention or psychotherapy. This is not very much a treatment, and medications are not very relevant here. And this is not a severe stress reaction or PTSD or any other stress-related condition that we know. This is something very humane that didn't allow him to live and function in a calm way, in a usual way. So singling out the way of survival seems relevant to me. Please switch to the next slide. This slide is about another brigade and another time. There were very difficult combat activities in the east, and we were holding the defense. It was on one of the strategic directions. I was the chief of the group in the center, and we were debriefing one of the brigades that retreated. We gave up their positions, they retreated, and in 1 month we processed all people in the brigade. We had a big team of psychologists, 10 or 12 psychologists we had. We gathered this team from different units, and we went to this brigade to do the debriefing exercises. And this is the story that happened there. In one of the mechanical battalions, well, I was trying to make a debriefing, but it was very difficult. The boys were very demoralized, fatigued, exhausted. 2 or 3 days passed after they left the positions. They were drinking a lot, but it wasn't the acute phase. They were coming to but it was very difficult to establish a contact. They were very aggressive. They didn't perceive me well. They said, "Why have you come here? What can you tell us? Why do we need this debriefing?" Because we had this very difficult situation. So it was a very difficult situation. It was difficult to establish the contact. And one by one, they started shouting and telling us what happened. The essence was that their unit received an order to retreat, and they were forced to leave 4 injured soldiers in a saving shell, the so-called point or position.
Because the withdrawal was only possible in the case of them running fast in the night because everything was being shot through, and the order was given from the top, the order for everyone to evacuate and leave the casualties behind, because if they were to leave, everyone would die, approximately 30 people. And then it turned out that when the Russians captured our casualties, they executed them and videoed this and posted it online on YouTube. And this led to, well, it's really hard for me to say this because it's a traumatic episode. It led to a large traumatization of the whole unit, of a large unit, because everyone felt them and thought that they were traitors because they left their brothers and others behind, and they evacuated and even though they had no other options because they were encircled. So 30 people were encircled, 20 26 people got out, 4 people were left behind because they were heavy casualties. And when the guy started talking about this with tears, with screams, with aggression, obviously it was a very complicated issue for them. It was understandable that they were uh, blaming themselves, the commander, everyone. Of course, they were blaming themselves. They were screaming things like, I had to stay with my buddy. It's my brother. I had to stay with them for the whole unit. And it was a large unit. It was an immense trauma. But the biggest impression was my conversation with the commander that issued this order. And he told me, he said, just send me to jail or shoot me. And I saw what a moral trauma means, moral injury is, if we're talking about commanders as burdens. And believe me, a similar phenomena was observed by me. I'm not talking about the captivity, but about commanders suffering from their decisions. And that's why it's essential in our military to implement a separate decompression and as well as decompression with the commanding units from the company commanders and up. Nobody works with them because everyone is because although I was a major myself, everyone thinks that everyone is a subordinate. So we did not reach the uh, our chain of command in order to provide them with debriefing and decompression, and they suffer more than us. That is why me and my colleague and our Americans, we've decided to single out this category of a weight of command and a separate classification, so to say, because it is something specific. When I talked to this battalion commander, I understood that he needs assistance. And in those extreme conditions, I do not have the right to judge whether it was right or wrong. Of course, he saved 26 soldiers. He could have lost everyone. The Russians could have executed everyone as they often do. And I tried to find some words of support and words of words that would calm down. And these issues are very important for the work of the psychologist. And I really just thank the boys for their service. And it's very important in our job because people do not thank them a lot. They do not listen to them. They do not give them the possibility to speak. And when I was offered to present here, I thought that I needed to say this. We possess the possibility to create the atmosphere for the decompression of those aspects, of those traumas, of moral traumas, of combat traumas, in order to stabilize the boys. And it really works. And I'm honest. And it's based on reviews and based on our conversations with the veterans and on the way the servicemen treat the correctly established psychological work. Even the episode I've mentioned, like in the building when we had an improvised debriefing, when we had a lot of aggression. Like, for example, they said, why did you come here? And then as a goodbye, we said, Slava Ukraini, Heroям Slava, because everyone understood that we are one, we're together. And these 3 cases were specifically presented to you so that we would understand the specifics and the peculiarities of such states that which you cannot classify as, say, psychological or psychiatric diagnosis or anything else. And they need uh, a special status. They need special treatment and support. So, so the major has said his speech. Thank you. Thank you. I'm ready to answer your questions. Oleg? Well, I wanted to add some things about the fact that you said that it's impossible to put this phenomena, the state, within the realms of a diagnosis. I think it's true because it's a very complex phenomena that definitely goes out of reach of medicine, even the psychology, and especially uh, we also mentioned the spiritual level, which might suffer as well. I think it's very important, and that's why we need to have our multidisciplinary teams and the units that would also have the chaplain there. And it does not really matter what religious affiliation this chaplain would be. For example, I know chaplains, even polytheists, like he's heathens essentially, that focus on this. Because if we're talking about moral trauma, since well, in this article we've established 8 cases, but I think we can provide you more additional cases that would single out some other aspects. For example, treason, guilt, responsibility. I think we can also add the aspect of the loss of sense. Vlad, you always talk about the existential psychotherapy, and I think Frankl also mentioned something like this. Well, how can people really treat other people like that in the concentration camps? Well, there's no humanity. And then when we were conducting a webinar on moral injury, moral trauma, and my comrade from from America was here, and he is the friend of the John Shea, the author of this method. And from the Ukrainian side, we invited Andrei Zelinsky. I think a lot of people know about him, and he talked about this loss of humanity when you lose this quality, and what is this quality. And then I thought that trauma, well, something has been traumatized, then something does exist. Something has to exist. Some ethical coded ethics, some moral norms, some understanding and association of self with good deeds, with being a good person who does good things. And we could also have moral trauma when something very bad happens in your life and you might lose hope. Like, how could it be like this? Bad things don't happen to good people, but unfortunately, they still happen. So, friends, we invite you to a small discussion. Well, Elijah, since you mentioned moral trauma, I remembered how for a long time we tried to battle the notion of moral psychological support, because in our view it's the heritage of the Soviet Union, but right now we understand it's very important. And that's why, as paradoxical as it may sound, my reaction is like this. and and this sense was lost because of the moral psychological support. We just have the psychological support of the personnel. We've lost the morality. Well, since the morality, we might see some words in the English speaking literature. First, we have moral as in moral, morale, like external ethics, and morale as in the battle combat spirit. And that is why it's essential to keep this in mind, because we're also talking about the morale, of the combat morale, not only about the ethics of behavior. So, friends, yeah, we have a little. So we had a. So we've called this unit the music unit because we provide so much support. Well, right now I have the possibility of working with the veterans and also with acting servicemen. Well, it's not paradoxical because the war is still happening, and and I've changed my place of service for my place of work. I work as a therapist, and I say that the moral component, the moral trauma, is, as we say, a definition, another definition to work as a therapist. You do not need to conduct differential diagnosis, as medics like to say in order to issue some antidepressants. You can work with the whole complex, which is called a moral trauma. Well, I allow something like this to happen in my head, but I reach some degree of success in my work as a psychotherapist, and I have the right to say so. But I am praising myself here. So let's move on to the questions. I would like to hear the colleagues that are currently in the military. So what do they think? What do they agree with? What do they not agree with? I see 2 hands here. Okay, who is the moderator? Please help us. I can see Tatiana here. Good evening, Mr. Vladislav. I remember when I met with you online on a different on Texas project, so I read a lot about you because I was looking up the article and I saw that the article is paid. So first of all, the question is, so in the abstract, you state that you present some approaches, and also read the fact that you are logotherapist, and I'm also I'm of similar profession, so we have the spiritual level here that Oleg talked about. The sound is off. We cannot hear you. I'm sorry. So you did not hear me at all? Now it's better. So I remember when I saw you last time, and I understand that according to the article is paid, and I would like to hear what instruments you offer. I see that you're studying logotherapy. I would like to share that I'm also studying this. Well, I'm not only studying, but I'm also practicing it as the tool for the spiritual level that Oleg talked about. If we're talking about chaplains, we need spiritual support. But if we're talking about psychologists or psychotherapists, that also have tools of supporting this level. Because as for me in studying these questions, I saw studies that provide the differentiation between these aspects and different types of moral trauma, and it's been proven with functional studies. And if we talk about the clusters of emotions that are being connected with PTSD, hopelessness, for example. So the trauma is, so we have the guilt and also the negative feeling towards oneself, this moral feeling. You know, some psychologists call it higher feelings, but honestly, we need to just work with them. And I wanted to ask you, because I cannot read the article, it's paid. So how do you work with this? What do you do? Hey, thank you for the question. We need to provide a link on that. So the journal keeps the article behind a paywall. We'll talk about this with the coordinators and with the organizers, and we'll provide you with the whole article if it does not open like that. So I work in a private institution. I am a psychotherapist, but at the same time, I also study logotherapy because I've been interested in this for a long time. And my supervisor, for example, Marshall Lewis, who is a representative of the current modern logotherapy, he says that the best logotherapists in Ukraine that deal with existential problems that are present in Ukraine are not present in the whole world. So every day we we go through the ending of our lives and everything that's around us. We are under a constant threat. And so here it's a different, I think it's a different topic for a different webinar if we agree on something like this. But if we're talking about the work, I work in this establishment on the principles of ketamine assisted psychology. It's a widespread method in, say, the West, and it's legal since 2018 in Ukraine. And this altered state of identity allows for rethinking of some moments, including PTSD, depression, and aspects of moral injury. And you can also work with them on correcting and therapy. So in this key, so I'm talking about the ketamine assisted psychotherapy, but speaking about the article, we'll do everything so that you would receive it. I do not know how it is possible to do it on my end, but we will talk with the organizers on how to send an article your way. Yes? So we also have a small notice by Eric Drake. It's very interesting that according to studies, drone operators are more likely to suffer from moral trauma than PTSD. And it is precise because I've talked to a lot of drone operators, and I'm not sure whether we have included this into our article or not. I think it's present there. And one deputy on the psychological support of one of the battalions, he said that we cannot be here on our observational point. We cannot see the drones fly, and we cannot see the bodies of our fallen brothers. What is it? It's not PTSD. It's we're not talking about traumatic circumstances. It's morally traumatizing. You see the bodies of those who have fallen. You cannot evacuate the bodies because the area is being shelled constantly, and this signifies the existence of such a phenomena that you have to work with using specific ways. And existential therapy and other types are the most adequate here. Oh yeah, Rick, I understand everything. Okay, we have a lot of questions, so those who moderate, please allow people to say something. Well, Vladislav, I thought you were moderating in case that you were the first one. Go ahead. Okay, I did not know I had such a possibility. Well, the process has shifted. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yes, yes, we can. Well, I raised my hand because Eric's comment was essentially the thing I wanted to say. I wanted to say that since if at the beginning of the war we mobilized and started to classify all those different trauma when we had drones and a lot of operators, and right now we have the epidemics of those new complicated cumulative trauma, and not only we have the operators, we also classify them into bombers, reconnaissance, and long range reconnaissance. And even those traumas can be classified onto different stages. And there's a large issue like that. Even right now, we have issues with the operators of EW, and we have different components there. For example, when a person was in the infantry for a long time, and you can get a person to a lighter place, a lighter city, we started training them to be operators, and we saw that this was an even worse improvement there because a person was working under stress and working in the trenches, and when the person is in the dugout and they are safe, and when they see everything from their drone controller, they are traumatized, and it's traumatizing, and that's why they have a lot of panic attacks. Their whole body gets ready, and we even have the syndromes of for example, of reconnaissance troops that observe their victims for a long time, so they start sympathizing them, and we have some Stockholm trauma there. or for example, the God syndrome in FPV drone operators when they see that they hit everything and they start having their own issues. And with the appearance of drones and drone operators that are constantly looking at the screen, we've had a different cluster of trauma that has to be classified and has to have new methods of treatment. So thank you, Serhi. That's a very valuable piece of information. And I remember 2024, April, we were in Warsaw on a conference and we presented the psychological support on the international conference. And only then it obvious and it became obvious and relevant that drones would change the way the war is conducted and the trauma is perceived. And 2 years have passed from this conference. And I can only say that, like, I have active servicemen, for example, boys from Pokrovsk that come to Kiev for treatment, like their battalion commanders, in order to, and they come here in order to get treatment for 2 to 3 days to receive some recovery. Of course, they're dealing with medication and they want to return into service as fast as possible. And they get exhausted. I know about cases like this. And I've had a recommendation like this with the psychiatry department. Oleg knows who I'm talking about here. It's the Academy of the Ukrainian military medical academy, and we have to implement stuff like this. We need to allow psychiatrists to work on the battlefield. The Russians use this actively. We still have this division, and there's not enough psychiatrists, but you can still treat the trauma more actively using the medication. But we're talking about the everything else, but we also need to understand that we need to unite and we can write up some program that would help us to combat different trauma. For example, the length of an operator's workday. For example, I have an operator uh, who is still on his position for 6 hours and then he has 6 hours of rest. Because if you look at the screen for a long time, it's traumatic because you have a lot of things happening there. And of course, if you do not understand some things, for example, some commanders understand like, oh, come on, you're just playing with toys. There are still things like this. They don't understand what's going on. Same thing for the UAV operators or EW operators and everything else. When a person is focused on something and looks at a screen and looks for some information, and it is a direct channel for the trauma. That's the first thing. And also we have a lot of exhaustion. For example, VW guys, they understand that because of them, uh, and it is their job to cover the front lines. They understand this, and when they get tired, they make themselves be on duty for longer. They cannot just stand up and be revealed. And we need to write proper graphs for being on duty. So we need to have proper rotations, proper duty, and we need to have a lot of things that need to be written down. And this would help us combat many things.
I can only say that we were trying to contact the commanders all the time when I used to serve with the General Holodnyuk, chief of the psychological support. So all the ideas that we had, we submitted the debriefing protocol and it was approved. So we can achieve our goals. If you need any help, I'm ready to participate. We can exchange our contact details with Serhiy and I can do everything possible. And we can have meetings with colleagues to draft the regulations. I believe that by and large we already have this. So mostly everything is regulated by statutes. All those things have been already studied. When we had an issue of the operator deficit, there was a question if we can hire girls to serve as drone operators. And when we were doing this, it turns out that Americans have already made a survey and research about it. When they were at war in Afghanistan, they noticed that the UAV operators, the bombers that located in another at a distance, for example, the bombers were flying in Afghanistan and the operators were in Pakistan in safer spaces, but they were suffering even more than the soldiers who participated in the direct combat. So the fact when they see who they kill, this factor is very important. And so the UAV operator understands that they always hit, that they kill somebody. And then these thoughts catch up with you. And also they think that today I'm sitting here in the safe space and I'm traveling with this deadly drone, and in several hours I go back home and sit with my wife. This is a cognitive factor that has a big impact. So we need to study this and implement this in our combat units. We are working on this. This is clear. Thank you. So we are moving forward. Nikita, please. Good day. I wish you good health. Good evening. For those who are in Ukraine, I would like to get back to the topic of moral injury. Now it becomes more and more relevant. And it's interesting. I have, as far as I see, we don't have some isolated things. If we used to have a classical PTSD after some traumatic event, and you understand that you can work efficiently with it through the exposition therapy, but now we have more and more complicated stories when PTSD already goes along with the moral component, moral trauma, and we have to work with it. And exposition methods don't always work here because we have to work on the moral component, and the cognitive processing therapy and other methods that include this aspect. Very often this aspect is even more resonant when you work with a client compared to their own traumatic event when there was a threat to their lives. This is a great topic, and it's great to be raising it. So I've only heard the word moral injury only recently, several months ago. I have never heard about this framework earlier. Now it seems that our community is trying to pay more attention to this. The more we have to move forward in the conditions of uncertainty, the more important it is. Because we need to maintain clarity for the boys in the front line, and we have to find answers to many of their questions. For example, why the commanders took certain or didn't take certain decisions, or why the soldier took a certain decision, why didn't he stay and die instead of somebody else. And the questions accumulate because every rotation to the position is an experience with a threat to their lives, and usually they tend to lose people in the processes. So this topic is very interesting. Thank you for raising it. Another point mentioned by Sergei, and it's very good to work on these issues on the systematic level. because now this work seems to be chaotic. It's easier to implement these things when you don't have to go to combat, when you have a clear schedule and rules, when you know clearly the number of people that you have, when they know clearly when they are going to rotation. But we have to work in the chaotic situation. Some people get changed chaotically, get rotated chaotically. Sometimes unprepared people have to go to the front line, who are more prone to the injuries, to moral injuries. It's very difficult to take everything into account, taking if because a lot of commanders are incompetent in the military way. They are not always capable of working with the personnel. They lack soft skills, communication skills. And we as psychologists, we have to work with the commanders first of all, and not with the soldiers, because we can't cover everybody. And then the commanders have to work with the soldiers. So this is a very difficult situation. And it's great if we can find answers to these questions together. I would like to make a small remark, and then Yuri will speak. As for the responsibility of the commanders and moral responsibility, for example, personally for me, most of the moral trauma related to the service are connected with the commanders, the same commanders we had to work with Vladislav. And besides soft skills that are critically important, the hard skills also play the role, like high quality combat informing, debriefing after some incidents. Because I wasn't always present there. When the commander is informing the soldiers, he has to explain, why are we doing all this? He has to adequately explain what the mission is and why it is important. And this is one of the ways to reduce the moral dilemma and moral injuries for their subordinates. Yuri, please. I agree with Nikita and Oleg. But I would like to add a few words. But we can't hear you well. What about now? How is the sound? Hope you can hear me. Well, we shouldn't create multiple phenomena. We need to think if we can separate PTSD and the moral injury. If they often come together. But if the criteria of PTSD are not met, I would probably call this a crisis state. For example, in civilian life, we have infidelity in the family betrayal that can lead to similar moral injuries. Of course, chaplains can help. They can they can complement the psychologists, but we shouldn't be in a hurry to differentiate these things. Very often, working with PTSD comes along with treating moral injury. Thank you for the comment. I think PTSD has a clear definition. It has 4 clusters: avoidance, hypervigilance, and so on. But these things are not present in case of a moral injury, so this is something else. I can agree with you, but if it requires another approach, well, Nikita mentioned exposition therapy or cognitive behavioral therapy. This takes a lot of time, like 10 weeks, but we don't have 10 weeks. So I support the altered states of mind, of consciousness, and other approaches. Well, also the written exposition. If you use it, you can work for 5 weeks if this is a pure PTSD. But if it has a moral component, it might not work. We are moving forward. Sergei, please. I wish you good health. Sergei Berezin, chief of the psychological support. This topic is very interesting. I hope you can hear me well. I would like to mention that now, very often when we assess the state of the soldiers, we tend to stop at the stage of the combat stress, acute stress disorder, PTSD, but we often overlook the moral injury. Sometimes we don't even mention it. I don't remember, somebody mentioned the ethical aspect, and I remembered the feeling of shame about our place in the society. But now this is about our self-attitude, our place for ourselves, because the person cannot hide from themselves. And here we have to work most often with stress. Another thing, you mentioned decompression. We also do decompression exercises with everybody. In the previous year, we processed 580 soldiers, and I visited the combat positions during hostilities. And there was a very difficult point when you see a soldier who needs recovery. He feels very difficult psychologically. He is very bad, and he has some somatic attributes. But commander just says, this guy is not injured physically. He feels he is okay, so please go on to the combat. So, of course, we can do some counseling at the front line, but we can't take this person for recovery to the rear because we have critical shortage of people. And because of that, we have to work with the consequences later. In our regiment, we pay a lot of attention to the psychological preparation for prevention. We train soldiers to recognize negative states in themselves and verbalize them, and we teach them self-help, or we teach them so that they know when they need to ask for help, when they need to refer to a medical professional. All right, Mrs. Cudler, Mr. Cudler, Mr. Harold.
Thank you. You know, I think there are several false dichotomies between PTSD and moral injury, and they have to do with the descriptive nature of the diagnostic manual that the American Psychiatric Association created in 1980, and also with biological versus psychological views. And it gets very
I'm sorry, you have muted yourself. Please repeat the last sentence.
Yeah, well, all right, thank you. Not every stressful event causes PTSD. Not every morally injurious event causes PTSD. But many times PTSD comes out of a morally injurious effect, In fact, I would argue, from 30 years of working with combat veterans, that what makes certain events traumatic is the moral aspect of it. What it does to a person's sense of identity, their beliefs in other people, their beliefs in the world, the shattering of basic assumptions. So I think we should realize, that moral injury can be traumatic. It isn't always traumatic. And it's often a key aspect of PTSD, and not worry so much about dividing them, but rather understand when the moral factor is core for the treatment and the understanding and treatment of an individual.
Thank you. Sergey, please. Please unmute your microphone. I'm sorry for speaking so often. As far as I understand, mostly we have people here who work with the military personnel. As for the methods that we can use working with the military staff members, I'm a clinical psychologist and a psychotherapist of the 3rd Storm Brigade, and I have some experience. I used to be a client of psychologists when I was in combat, and now I am doing my own sessions with the military staff members. I believe that all the conversational methods do not help people because the traumas are so deep that they are somewhere in the reptilian brain, and they are impossible to reach with words. Today, me and the colleagues have reached a conclusions that the most efficient methods to work on the trauma and injury of the military is the focus-oriented therapy of Peter Levin and Max Weber and EMDR. These are the methods that allow to work efficiently with people. They have the impact and results. We have to take into account the fact that the soldiers coming to us, who are referred to us by the commander or by their own initiative, because they feel so bad, they are ready to do everything and to work with the devil. But we understand that they will not be able to do the full cycle of therapy. They will just drop out when they feel easier, or they will be sent to combat. Therefore, we need to use the methods that will give some impetus in the initial stage to overcome the trauma. And because most of our military have already traumatic experience, and there are processed and unprocessed trauma, PTSD, and acute stress reactions and moral injuries, they just compound. And we have such a big cumulative trauma that it's very difficult to sort the things out. And you have to trust the methods that you work with. This is my comment. Thank you. If I may, I totally agree with you. According to our experience in the 30th Brigade, EMDR works really well, and there is no time for talking therapy. This is why I decided to use the altered state of mind. As I mentioned, this is really efficient, but they sort of reduce the combat readiness because they relax people a lot. So you can compensate something for the person, but then brain swatting will work. I know you're psychologists. You are doing great job, and you are the best in this. Thank you. Julia, please. Good evening. Thank you for this opportunity. I would like to add some methods. You mentioned the written expositional therapy. This is a relatively short method compared to the others, something between the somatic things and conversational therapy. I have experience with several cases. Of course, this is not a statistical sample, but I have been working with moral injury and with written expositional therapy. It is sort of off-label because it is recommended for the PTSD, but I have a very good response, and the results were evaluated by the clients in a month or 3 months after we completed this type of therapy. So we can see the cycle. If we have a moral injury, it takes more time. There is a bigger period that it takes because it uses more processes for the people to become more conscious about their situation. But we have this method, and it is efficient. Dear colleagues, do you have any questions or comments? Yuri, in the chat box, there was a question about some results of the treatment. What were the results of the cases that you mentioned? Well, these cases were presented in order to show what types of problems or conditions there are.
And the organizers did not tell me about it, but whether we have achieved any positive results with therapy like this and what I'm working with right now. So we're essentially tracing our steps here on the publication of, like in the journal Military Psychology. These guys did not go through therapy. These are active servicemen, and this is the issue, that the war is really cruel, and you cannot just take them from the front lines. It is not possible. And that's why they have not gone through therapy, if we're talking about psychotherapy or psychiatrical help. It's just a description of the states that were noticed during their service. Unfortunately, we did not think about treatment then. Well, thank you, because I think it would be a very important clarification of the whole topic. Okay, we move on. Yuri? We do not hear you. I see that you're talking, but we do not hear you. No. Oh, something happened. Perhaps you can just text it into the chat and then we'll read it. Cool. Oksana, I have a question. Can we organize the fact that we can send the article, because people say that it's impossible to open the link. If I send you the article, that's a great question. Let me comment here. If you published something in a paywall, you cannot share it openly. You have a specific number of preprints that are sent in person, and that's it. And that's very essential. And the webinar here is the possibility to talk about the article and limited number of samples, and samples of this article can be given to different people, and those colleagues have the should say that they do not spread this article into the open, because they might get in trouble for this. They provided me with 50 copies. Okay, so like this. So colleagues, These are the restrictions of the conditions that this article was published on. So given the possibility, ask the authors, because they're sitting here. Can I say something? Can you hear me? Somebody else, go ahead. Well, for my Ukrainian colleagues, I had a master's degree, and my topic was the formulation of the emotional uh, strength of the serviceman, and I performed work on how to create this emotional grid of a person. When I lost my arm, lost my leg, and every serviceman when they need rehabilitation, and when I was in the rehabilitation for more than 2 years, the serviceman still is on their own, no matter what, and 70%. You really need to explain that everything depends on the serviceman. Only the serviceman has to be interested in the quality of the rehabilitation. And by the way, you're a cool person. It's really nice to hear that. There you go, the combat spirit. So I think we would like to thank Alexander for for putting this thing over and adding this cherry on top. And thank you for your participation and for combining different roles, a veteran and a specialist. And God give you a fast recovery and a happy continuation of the life that you are continuing on in this post-traumatic world. So, colleagues, I think we're approaching the end. 1.5 hours have elapsed. If we have no questions that should be voiced right now, well, Oleg, we have some organizational matters. So the word for you. Okay, colleagues, we invite you to the exchange of experiences through mail, because this chat disappears later. We do not save it, and the email address, actually, the address that you received the listings from, you can ask the contacts of the colleagues that you've seen here. You can also add your suggestions, and I would also like to say, on behalf of me and my colleagues, that we've had an interesting thought of suggesting some surveys, because we need to understand what is relevant for you, what formats, what topics need to be discussed, and we would really like you to be active in this. And so I invite you to join these surveys, and if you do not want to receive anything like this, and if the mail is going to be bothering you, we would not be sending you mail more than once a week, but if anything, you can let us know so that we would not include your email on the list. Thank you. I have another suggestion to this suggestion. If the founders would like to include more active communication in this community, I think it can be done better in some messenger, Signal or WhatsApp or something like that. And then you would have a more active communication and people would join this group. We would exchange the information, relevant information, some demands in case something pops up. So I see that live chat would be preferred based on the reaction we have here. Real-time chat, yes, because everyone works, everyone has Signal, WhatsApp or something like that. So I do not see any issues with this. Thank you.
Oksana, can I make a comment before we end here? Um, just an observation that today, more than any other session we have had, we have had almost 150 participants. So clearly, this is an important conversation, and I really appreciate being able to see everyone's faces. Having cameras turned on has made a real difference. And then a final observation from our group today is to try to encourage all of you to think about writing and recording some of your experiences. This is going to be very important in the future for us to understand the effects of this war, the work that you've done, and to further science broadly around the issues of war, stress, trauma, rehabilitation, interventions, dealing with issues like moral problems. So again, encouraging all of you to think about ways that you can write and help publish to share with some of your colleagues, not just in Ukraine, but across the globe. Again, thank you today for your active participation. Back to you, Oksana.
And Jim, my apologies if I can jump in. Hello, folks. This is Erin with online support. Because of how the clock changes are on different dates, if you are in the US, we will have a different start time for our next webinar on the 20th. I did post that in chat. We will begin at noon Eastern time for our next webinar and then resume the 11 a.m. start time beginning on April 3rd. So as Jim echoed, we had well over 150 in the room. We love seeing everyone and we appreciate you taking the time to join us for today's event.
Thank you.
Okay, colleagues, so this is the end today, so keep yourself safe. Thank you. You're all good. Thanks, Vladislav. Thanks, colleagues. Jim, thank you to our interpreters. Thank you for helping us all this time. Keep yourself safe. Thank you to Oksana, Olena, and everyone else.